Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of nice. Therapy-wise, to have somebody.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Morning.
Oh, okay, then throw it away.
Why are you back here?
Don't leave your trash. Just
You're
because I
never
took
back
his
here.
spot.
Yeah, but he's all the way up there.
I don't remember being
I do like my
siblings.
Can I have my bibble?
You're lucky you only got one. I got 4.
And I'm technicality, I have 2. I just don't see one at all.
I know, so you get less abuse.
Here. More like she gets less abuse.
Water. No, not. It is chocolate.
Oh, I forgot to mention, Venmo wanted you, so. Yeah,
Helen card.
Me and her were talking about doing April, but for you to
It's not
spend
really
time with
bubbles.
Grandpa,
You drink it.
so you would go, me and you would go to Hawaii, then I would go with Grandma to Japan, and you would see Grandpa for like 2 days. You wanna do that?
Do you two want to go to Japan, David?
Kind of.
People in your eyes said yes.
I know.
Mommy wants you to take them out. So we're gonna
All right.
Well, the other option.
Do you need got blankets and pillows? Can't really see where the water's at. We're not having no more bubbles.
You want?
Kyle is kind of not really seen and very sleepy, but
Gibbery.
do you want this one? Do you want that blankie? Do you want
Hey,
to go with
Emmy.
You wanna go blinky? You wanna go pink blinky? You want a sweet?
Mary.
Sorry.
Hey, would you mind shutting the door, please? Sibley, you staying here for study?
Probably wants you to stay in here and potentially nap.
Oh.
Do you need a blanket?
All right, good morning. Let's open up in prayer. Father God, thank you for this day. I pray that you would bless those who are away, that you'd watch over them. Pray that you would give us a mind and heart of worship and praise. And I pray that anything that's taught today that is false, that would be forgotten. And thank you for this body and all that you provide us with. Amen. All right, so we've been going through the history of Rome, and again, why concern ourselves with Rome, because as we get into, we're looking at the history of the church, and one of the biggest influences on the Messianic community was Rome. So I think it's important to understand who Rome was, how it affected the church and its structure, and so we started, or last weekend we talked about Gaius Julius Caesar, who was the first Caesar. And basically his rise in starting the transition from Rome. Sebo. So the transition of Rome from a republic to an imperial style nation. So the first Caesar was instrumental in doing that. If you remember, he kind of rose through the ranks, became a general, marched on Rome, and essentially pushed aside the Senate, or started the process of pushing aside the Senate. And anybody remember how Caesar died?
The Senate collected on all the debts that he had
By
drawing
with their
blood-
daggers,
by
with their
drawing blood
swords.
from 'em.
Yep. Yeah, so he was assassinated, which is called the Ides of March. So his grandnephew, who was named his adopted son in Caesar's will, Octavian, became emperor. So we looked at Octavian and his establishment of the triumvirate. And how he pushed the other two, which would have been Lepidus. Lepidus was and Antony, Mark Antony, were part of that triumvirate. So he essentially pushed them aside and became emperor. And at that point, the Senate basically lost all its power. So then we went into Tiberius. And he became emperor after Octavian's death. So Tiberius became emperor and ruled from 14 AD to 37 AD. And during Tiberius's reign, if you remember, he was a very paranoid emperor. He thought all of Rome was out to get him, and in fact, he spent the latter part of his office ruling from an island, or outside of Rome, and became a pretty corrupt person. He would, sleep with boys, cast them off cliffs when he was done with them. It was during his rule, and this is something I want to look at briefly today, was he established Pontius Pilate as the governor of Judea. So Pontius Pilate served under Tiberius from 26 to 36 AD. The only other historical mentions of Pontius outside of Scripture is from Josephus and Philo. Philo was a Hellenized Jewish philosopher. Josephus wrote that Pilate was dismissed after a very violent quelling of a Samaritan uprising at Mount Gerizim, which is located in the West Bank. And he was ordered by the Syrian legate, and we'll talk about the Syrian legate here as we get into the Jewish war. A legate was essentially the highest ranking military officer. So they would have, legates assigned to different regions. And so Pilate was ordered by this legate to go to Rome to face Tiberius, but before he went to Rome, Tiberius died before Pilate arrived. And then as far as Pilate's fate, we don't really know. Their history doesn't record what happened to Pilate. So with that, it's during this time period that the Messiah, that Yeshua, is persecuted and crucified. So I wanted to show a quick video of, it's the person is a, he's got, 4 different acronyms after his name, which may or may not, doesn't really mean much to me, but the way he's done a lot of research in how Rome performed their persecutions, and so it was kind of a new, some new information, at least for me, in terms of, the kind of persecution that someone like Yeshua went through. So I wanted to show you guys that to give you an idea both of, how ruthless during this time period Rome was, and what the Messiah actually went through. So, with that,
Are we talking about his crucifixion, or?
the time leading up. So, if you remember, he was flogged, right? And
Everything leading up to.
yep, and the crucifixion itself. So, some disclaimer. I'm gonna see if I can pause the online feed so we don't get copyright.
Company, it's Pure Talk. What do you mean there are holes in his heels?
Yeah, this is amazing.
Can you describe crucifixion? What was it? What was the
Yes.
purpose? How did they die?
Crucifixion was the most heinous way to die. It turns out humans are really good at figuring out terrible, tragic ways how to destroy ourselves. And
Yes.
crucifixion brings that to a fever pitch. The Persians likely invented it. Alexander the Great, who gives us the language of the Bible, Koine Greek, he also made crucifixion fashionable throughout his Hellenization of the world. The Romans come along and they take crucifixion that they learned from Greek Hellenization and they perfect it for 700 years. Remember, Josephus tells us that during the Jewish revolt, AD 66 to 70, Titus and Vespasian are crucifying 500 Jews a day. And so they were experts. Now, it wasn't like they had a crucifixion manual. There were 30 provinces in the empire during the time of Jesus. Remember, we have Pontius Pilate, who's governor. We have first Augustus, who's emperor, and then we have the other emperors who followed during the time of Jesus. There's 30 provinces. And the provinces would practice crucifixion in different ways, but it was in the Syrian province where Judea was, where it was particularly heinous. I already mentioned we have 21 different records of crucifixion with nail piercing. Nails were iron. I actually have a nail artifact that I'm going to show you. In fact, this is
These 3 states are quietly letting drivers out of the insurance middleman, and the big companies are not happy about it. If you live in one of these states and are a resident there, you can now officially apply to have your auto insurance rate.
This is a great time to do that. I want you to hold the replica of the crucifixion nail. This is a crucifixion nail. It was circular on top, and then it was actually a spike.
Yeah, so that's really what I wanted to show you, just how, you know, a couple things I didn't realize. The flogging tool, you know, had lead balls at the end of it.
Well, it would be sharp metal too. 'Cause
Yeah.
you grab the skin and pull the skin.
Right.
Take the skin right off you.
And then the fact that, you know, the cross, you know, the typical, you know, image is they go drive a nail through both feet, but you know, you straddle the main beam, and then they throw a nail on both sides through the heel. And then they have, in an attempt to survive, you know, they would sit and try, you know, lift up on those nails to try to breathe. It's pretty ruthless. So that was Pontius Pilate. So, and then if you remember Tiberius, his death was speculated to be poisoned, and then smothered while he was ill in his bed. So, if you remember, Tiberius took under his wing Caligula. So Caligula's family was basically all murdered by Tiberius. So Tiberius killed his older brothers, his mother and father, and then, yeah, yeah. Except, you know, think of that dome thing, nasty. So, so Tiberius takes Caligula and into his house, and so he has to live with this guy that killed almost his entire family except his two sisters. So after Tiberius's death, Caligula takes the throne. And so if you can think about a child that has to live through that kind of childhood, you know, how they would turn out as an adult. So he didn't really have much of a chance to turn out normal. Eventually he, you know, this is speculation, but the popular view was that he was, you know, performing incest with his sister, because, you know, having almost his entire family killed, he became very close with his sisters, especially his younger sister. And so, you know, the Romans believed that he was, you know, doing incest with her, because there were a number of ceremonies that were typically reserved for a man and his wife. And, you know, when Caligula would hold these ceremonies, it would be with his sister. So, to give you some other ideas of what Caligula would do, he had a lot of disdain for the Senate. So he would bring senators and their wives to his palace, and then he would take their wives while the senators were there, and, you know, he would do that in order to dishonor the senators. He envisioned and instituted the penalty. You've probably heard death by 1,000 cuts. So he'd usually have someone's tongue cut out, and then he would have them, you know, basically cut as many times as possible before they die, and he'd have their tongues cut out so that he could sit and enjoy their persecution in peace, is what he would say. He also tried to have a statue of himself placed in the Temple of Jerusalem, but Herod Agrippa, who, you know, he had mentioned, actually his father, was able to talk Caligula out of doing that, because Herod knew that it would create a revolt. The Senate eventually had enough of Caligula's and so they, you know, assassinated him, his wife, and daughter. So upon his assassination, the great-grandnephew of Caesar, Augustus, his name was Claudius, took the reign, and he was kind of a gray man. He was considered stupid among the Romans, but he actually, when he became emperor, he proved to be actually a very pretty wise emperor. Nothing too significant about Claudius, but it is believed that Claudius died from poisoning instituted by Agrippina. So Agrippina has a son whose name is Nero, and so Agrippina was trying to ensure that her son would take the throne. So the Romans believed that Agrippina poisoned Claudius, and so upon Claudius's death, enter Emperor Nero. So Claudius ruled from 41 AD to 54 AD. And so then we have Emperor Nero who starts his rule in 54 AD. So historians believe that, it's kind of a toss-up between Claudius and Nero, but they believe that Nero was probably the ruthless emperor in Rome's history. So Nero had both his ex-wife and mother killed. He would hold large orgies in public. If you remember, we talked about the Great Fire in Rome. So the Romans became suspicious of Nero. They believed he was the one that started the fire because he had expressed the desire to, basically build an extravagant palace. But in order to do it, he needed to take over regions of Rome that had already been built up and were already owned. So they believed he started the fire in an attempt to, basically take over ownership of those regions so he could institute his construction. So in an attempt to, thwart the blame, he saw this, up and coming movement, the Christians, the first century church, and so he blamed the Christians for the fire. So he would have them burned alive. So he'd actually create human torches at his parties, and so he would set up these Christians around his parties and light them on fire. I don't know. So in order to maintain Nero's extravagant lifestyle, he increased taxes. So the Romans had set up a tax system where they privatized it. So, what they would do is have, companies or well-to-do individuals bid on a contract to take basically institute the taxes in that region. So if you can imagine, if you're a private company with this contract, there's an incentive to obviously make profit. So you're going to take the base tax rate and you're going to add on top of it so that you can make a profit.
Well, your bid set the base tax rate.
Right. But they would add on top of that base rate. So the high priest and the Pharisees would also take these contracts and would collect more than what was owed to the state. So just to take a step back and look at the political situation in Judaism, the political situation of Judaism during this period in the first century was significantly influenced by Hellenization and specifically by the Seleucids. Can anybody think of one such instance of what would cause the well, here. What was a major event that would affect the Jews in the 1st century BC in reference to the temple? That would have
That came
kind
from
of,
the Seleucid dynasty?
yeah. Antiochus Epiphanes, does that ring a bell?
Okay.
So, Antiochus Epiphanes conducted an aggressive political program of Hellenization around 169 BC, and he plundered the temple and entered the most holy place. Actually, I was going to read some passages out of Maccabees here. Let's see. So Antiochus, after he had smitten Egypt, returned in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered presumptuously into the sanctuary, and took the golden altar and the candlestick of the light, and all that pertained thereto, and the table of the showbread, and the cups to pour withal, and the bowls, bowls, and the golden censers, and the veil, and the crowns, and the adorning of the gold which was on the face of the temple. And he scaled it all off. And he took the silver and the gold and the precious vessels, and he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all that, he went away into his own land, and he made a great slaughter, and spake very presumptuously. And there came great mourning upon Israel in every place there where they were, and the rulers and elders groaned. The virgins and young men were made feeble, and the beauty of the women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation. She that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness, and the land was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. In 168 BC, he issued a religious edict, which was a prohibition of the exercise of the Jewish religion. And in addition, in 167 BC, he introduced the cult of the god of Zeus in the Jerusalem temple, and had altars set up everywhere at which everyone could sacrifice to the foreign religion. The goal of the Seleucids was a complete Hellenization and integration of Judea. So in response to this, an opposition movement formed within Judaism to combat this violent effort at assimilation. The advocates for forced Hellenization within Judaism were a minority around this time, but they profited personally from it. So those basically, that worked alongside the Seleucids would make profit. But most Jews, especially those in the countryside, responded to these efforts at Hellenization either with skepticism or complete rejection. The beginning of the open resistance against Antioch was led by a Jewish priest named Mattathias. What's that? Matthias. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Out of zeal for the law, struck dead another Jew who was about to offer a sacrifice at a pagan altar. He also struck the royal official who went to force them to offer a sacrifice. He then tore down the altar. So I'll read that really quick. And Matthias answered and said with a loud voice, if all the nations that are in the house of the king's dominion hearken unto him, to fall away each one from the worship of his fathers, and have made choice to follow his commandments, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. Heaven forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words, that's Antiochus, to go aside from our worship on the right hand or on the left. And when he had left speaking these words, there came a Jew in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. So he's preparing a sacrifice per Antiochus's commandment to Zeus. And Matthias saw it, and his zeal was kindled, and his reins trembled, and he shewed forth his wrath according to judgment, and ran and slew him upon the altar. And the king's officer, who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and pulled down the altar, and he was zealous for the law, even as Phinehas did unto Zimri, the son of Selu. And Matthias cried out into the city with a loud voice, saying, Whosoever is zealous for the law, and maintaineth the covenant, let him come forth after me. And he and his sons fled into the mountains, and forsook all that they had in the city. So soon after the beginning of the uprising in the year 167 BC, Matthias died, and his son Judas came to be the head of the movement and the military leader, and he was called the Maccabee. So soon those who were true to the law, including the Hasidians, which is a group of pious Jews who were known for their strict adherence to Jewish law and tradition. So they were essentially the bearers of Jewish tradition, and they wrote a lot of apocalyptic literature. The Hasidians were the predecessors of the Pharisees, so that's the group that the Pharisees come out of. So the Pharisees take on recognized identity during the period of John Hyrcanus, who was the Jewish high priest during the Maccabees between 134 and 104 BC. The Pharisees appear as an established group with great reputation and oppose the king, and they continued to grow in influence up until Herod the Great, where they would turn from being a political group to being a movement of piety, which means essentially being, flagrant in their religious and reverence. So somewhere along the line, a radical group separated from the Pharisees, and they called themselves the Zealots. So if you remember, is it Seth or Simon the Zealot? So the Zealots themselves associated their ideal with Phinehas. So they basically, their mission statement was centered around Phinehas, who's from Numbers 25. I'll read that real quick. So Israel stayed at Shittim, and there the people began whoring with the women of Moab. These women invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, where the people ate and bowed down to their gods. With Israel thus joined to Baal, the anger of Adonai blazed up against Israel. Adonai said to Moses, Take all the chiefs of the people and hang them facing the sun before Adonai, so that the raging fury of Adonai will turn away from Israel. Moses said to the judges of Israel, Each of you is to put to death those in his tribe who have joined themselves to Baal. Just then, in the sight of Moses and the whole community of Israel, as they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting, a man from Israel came by, bringing to his family a woman from Midian. When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, so that's the guy that the Zealots kind of, identify with, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, saw it. He got up from the middle of the crowd, took a spear in his hand, and pursued the man from Israel right into the inner parts of the tent, where he thrust the spear through both of them, the man from Israel and the woman through her stomach. Thus was the plague among the people of Israel stopped. So they see they see themselves as with a similar mission statement to purify Israel. So the Zealots emerged around 6 AD under the leadership of the Galilean Judas of Gamala and the Pharisee Zadok. So if you read Acts 5:37, it mentions Gamala. The zealots were distinguished by their intensification of the first command of the Decalogue, which is the Ten Commandments. And the zealots observed strict Sabbaths and had a rigorous keeping of the commands for purity, and they strove for the radical theocracy and rejected Roman rule over the Jewish people on religious grounds. I'm 5 minutes over, so I'll stop there. So leading up to Nero, because we're going to get into the Jewish revolt, the political stability within Jerusalem is kind of corroding. So I'll cover the main sects, but we have the Pharisees, we have the Zealots, we have the Sadducees, and then there's another group which is called the Essenes. So we'll stop there. Any comments or questions?
Will you go over that group as well?
Essenes?
Yeah.
Yeah, briefly. Yep. All right. I thought it was interesting that. All right, that's all I got.
What do you think was interesting? You stopped your thought.
Oh, well, I just to understand, where the Pharisees came from, what brought them about. Ever since Antiochus, they've essentially just been, a puppet state of, whatever nation, whether it's the Seleucid or the Romans. There was a brief period where they enjoyed, somewhat independence during their Hasmonean rulership, but it's it's just interesting how these events kind of bring out, groups of people and their motivations. Yep.
I was thinking first, like, oh, people were really gross back then, and then I felt something go, Epstein, like, it's
Yeah.
the same thing.
We're just better at hiding it now.
Yeah.
It goes the other way too, like
Yeah.
the political turn is not changed. We're always gonna have it.
Yeah.
It's just how much actually is revealed.
Okay. Thank you.